Welcome back, TCB faithful, to the Runback, the obscure series that asks the question, was this fighting game actually good? By taking an uncomfortably close look at them and getting all slap happy about it. Since starting this little series, we've covered a good number of fighters, some well known and some rarely talked about. And I've always thought that one of the most semi-obscure titles we've ever covered was Oscar 120 Burning Fast Final, and that it would remain that way for quite some time. But through shared luck, I think we found something even more unknown.
See, I'm a pretty big Space Channel 5 fan, and I was randomly looking at some Google images when I happened to spot a picture of this character. At first, I thought it was just fan art of Chun-Li in an almost 2000 Sega art style. I didn't think anything of it until I saw another screenshot of her in what seemed to be a fighting game. Well, now that just piqued my interest, and after a couple of clicks, I found today's game, Slap Happy Rhythm Busters, in this strange collection of characters. Hold up, is that Oleg from fucking Versus?
Yeah, I think it is. That game scarred us so badly that we instantly recognized that, huh? We decided to look into this strange fighting with some light detective work, and although we discovered that there isn't any real development info on Rhythm Busters itself, we did discover that the game was made by Polygon Magic, whose game Fighter Impact we covered in the past, which means that ORAG very well might be a reference to Versus, which would make sense, being the more well-known game of the two. Oleg to ORAG, huh? Seemed like a lazy name change.
Well, Polygon Magic is a Japanese company, and there's a joke to be made about L's into R's, but I think we should just take the high road.
Good choice.
At any rate, I think we're getting a little ahead of ourselves. Slap Happy Rhythm Busters released in 2000 for the Japanese-only PlayStation. Unfortunately, it fell into the abyss fairly quickly considering the PS2 released that same year. Unfortunately, it came out a full 4 months after the highly popular console, so it's no wonder why it blipped out of existence with virtually no footprint. But let's get into it and see what everyone was so happy about. This is Team Crossbody, and was Slap Happy Rhythm Busters any good?
We're just warming up now.
Shockingly enough, compared to their previous work Fighter's Impact, which had a good amount of system mechanics under its hood, and the rebranded heavily altered Versus.
Nope. Remember, we both agreed not to talk about that game on this channel anymore. It was pretty much a nothing game that took Fighter Impact's mechanics, changed them for the worse, and then took his roster and divided each moveset into quarters in order to double its size. It sucks.
Well, we were kinda on the game's nuts when we first played it.
Big punch.
Stop.
Answers. Stop.
I have it all.
I have
This game is dope. I like this
You wanna
game.
do one more? That doesn't count. We were a new channel at the time, and it was more about playing something different and new to us.
My point was going to be that Rhythm Busters was also fairly similar to Versus, but good. There isn't really a lot to talk about when it comes down to the core mechanics, but we'll handle what's there in a few. First, the basics. Actually, if you know anything about the Marvel vs. Capcom series, specifically MVC2, then you'll have a massive head start on understanding this. Rhythm Busters is a 4-button game, consisting of light and heavy punches and kicks. Movesets are kept pretty small, with most characters only sporting around 3 or 4 moves, with commands also keeping things simple. There are no half or full circles here, not even Dragon Punch motions, with most of those moves being handled by a double down command, which is interesting because I thought that method only really showed up in a more modern era of fighters. Combos are taken directly from MVC or Darkstalkers through the Magic series, which allow players to string together normals by hitting them in ascending order. The game also features various command normals, dash attacks, wall bounces, and pop-ups to add variety to those combos. The only thing that seems to be missing are jump cancels. The game is surprisingly grounded for the vast majority of the cast. You know what? Another strange thing not seen very much in this particular style of game is how special moves are canceled. They don't seem to be performable after heavy normal attacks. There's also no super cancels, meaning supers cannot be canceled after a special attack either.
It's not me. That's a very weird choice, right? It makes constructing combos a little more unintuitive than I think Polygon Magic was going for. You need to work in a launcher or a wall bounce to capitalize on longer combos, otherwise you're mainly using special moves for punishes, or in certain circumstances to allow for confirms if a special move stays active long enough to leave recovery time afterwards. Otherwise, you're just throwing them out randomly, which is pretty dumb. But hey, it's still an option.
It's not you, it is odd. But outside of that, which might make getting into things a tad awkward for some, the overall focus of this game seems to be one of accessibility. You know, before it truly became the focus of every fighting game ever, this design philosophy also transfers over to the core mechanics of the game.
Slap Happy keeps a clean room here too, with very little going on. That's not to say there's completely nothing to talk about. Let's get into it. The game's super system won't throw anyone for a loop, although super meter can be built on whiff but not on block, oddly enough. Fighters are able to build meter up to 8 stocks, and yeah, that's a lot, but you'll be spending it on a couple of options. First up is the guard cancel, a technique you'll be using fairly often, which can be done for 1 stock of meter while guarding. Each fighter has 2 guard cancels, one while pressing both punches and the other with kicks. Unlike the typical action where the user does a special move or a unique animation for their guard cancel, they'll just throw out their heavy normal. It's even cancelable like a standard normal too. So if your fighter has a launcher on their crouching heavy attack, the next in line for the Magic series, then it's party time for you for relatively cheap. But don't get cocky with just throwing them out. They can be baited and punished, if not knocked out of the attack completely if mistimed. Characters have various supers or rave attacks as they're called in-game that can be performed for the cost of 1 stock of meter as well. There isn't much to say here outside of a few exceptions. Super attacks are your standard affair, being primarily used for maximizing on combos to squeeze out a little more damage as enders. But remember, they can't be canceled out of heavy attacks or specials. Going back to some of the strange choices the game makes, the stun system. Instead of making the opponent dizzy like any normal fighter, reaching the max of the stun gauge here will put a character in a special disadvantage state for a short time that will disable blocking. That means if you're aware enough with watching the opponent's stun meter, you can place the opponent in some nasty setups.
Yo, wait a minute, hold up. Did you say the game had 8 meters?
Yeah, duh, look at it. 8. I mean, it's a little strange to build meters so fast, but I didn't design the thing.
It's not a fucking 8, look at it. That's a B.
Oh, I guess the game's sense of style really backfired with the font choice, huh? But I guess that makes a lot more sense considering the last mechanic we're going to talk about, the beat rush. This is a universal super move that requires all 3 or B of your super meter. Activating this maneuver begins a minigame, but not just any minigame, a rhythm game.
Hey, I get it. Pretty clever.
Finally, we can show off all that time we wasted playing Parappa the Rapper and Unjammin' Lammy in the world of fighting games. While in beat rush mode, the user has to match the 4 face buttons in time with the music, with how much damage you deal depending on how much flow you have. The opponent can also run interference by trying to match the beats as well. This causes the directions of the notes to be mixed up, saving you from further music-based punishment, with finishing the match while in beat rush providing the flashing in. So that's good. At least there's an interaction that involves both players. It would be pretty annoying if there wasn't any way for the second player to engage with all this. If used anywhere else in a match, the damage is mediocre, dealing about 30%. You can pretty much get the same results with a well-optimized combo without spending all your resources. But you know, I respect Polygon Magic. Though what provides Rhythm Busters with its namesake is tucked away as a rarely seen expensive attack, that could have easily somehow been twisted into the main hook of the game, and that would have morphed the whole thing into just a gimmick.
And while it's not entirely useful all the time, it's still an option to use. So if you're in the middle of a combo and they have about 30% life left, and you're confident in your rhythm skills, why not send them to their demise with a little bit of style? You know what would have made all of this worse?
No, what?
If Beat Rush had his own meter independent from your standard super gauge. That way, we could have seen Beat Rush in every match.
Good thing that's not the case, because that'd be a little retarded. Who would want to see the same super animation used in the exact same situation every match? That'd get pretty repetitive, having every battle finish pretty much the same way. Beat Rush is an interesting but niche idea. Like what we said, it isn't always the most optimal thing to use, but at least it gives players a choice on how they want to spend their meter outside of super attacks and guard cancels. And proper decision making is an element of what makes a solid fighting game.
The mechanics of Slap Happy Rhythm Busters are very few, but everything does have a use enough in this filler. Overall, that is typically seen as a good thing in our little book, but maybe the game needed 1 or 2 more systems, or just a little more of anything in general, to make things slightly more busy. However, the addition of EX moves or even special attacks would have added so much to the moment-to-moment gameplay. As it stands right now, there just aren't a lot of options when it comes to the combat. Some members of the roster feel pretty complete even with the game's limited scope when it comes to, well, everything. But there's also a good number of characters whose design feels entirely aimless and disjointed. Either that's from not having enough special moves, bad feeling normal attacks, or both. It just makes characters that aren't very fun to play because of the incomplete feeling they have.
Another issue that we found particularly annoying is the characters themselves. This is more of a personal pet peeve, but I always found it strange when some fighters go with this chibi miniature style when it comes to their character models, as it gives a huge chunk of the cast a very tiny set of normals to play with when it comes to the topic of range. Very few fighting games can pull something like this off competently, and Rhythm Busters sadly isn't one of them. When games have this kind of art style, is usually compensated for by giving the game a larger focus on better movement, special moves, or some kind of unique mechanics. But as stated a little while ago, Slap Happy doesn't really have things like that, and it makes the overall combat feel cramped and stiff. And since neutral feels so bad, matches just devolve into knockdown set play battles. There's certainly nothing wrong with the game being that. God knows we played our share of fighters just like this, but it doesn't feel like this was intentional. It comes across more like a byproduct of limitations rather than a deliberate design choice, which makes the overall experience feel less cohesive.
That's not to say the game isn't fun to play or anything, but these issues do drag everything down by a significant amount. Once again, all these mechanics work fine and make sense, but it's really hard to shake the feeling that something is missing from its gameplay.
So I guess the main takeaway is that we're ultimately mixed on the gameplay of Slap Happy Rhythm Busters. Really feels like it needed more time to cook. But let's get away from the gameplay and quickly touch on the presentation.
Hey, hold on to your seats.
To complement the unique visuals, the story of Rhythm Busters include the most blackest, most brutal plots of all. Nothing!
Oh, come on, there's gotta be something there, right?
Well, yeah, the story in Rhythm Busters is pretty loose, and honestly feels more like an excuse to get all these characters in the same place rather than anything super cohesive. The game centers around a fighting tournament being held in a stylized downtown area, organized by a guy named Rule Boy who is tied to a group called Cloud. At the same time, a random UFO shows up nearby, which is about as weird as it sounds. And that ends up pulling in a bunch of different characters for their own separate reasons.
That's good enough, I guess. It's not like we were expecting anything super in-depth here or anything, especially for a 2000s fighting game, which is still very much stuck in that arcade-era minimalist story approach mindset. It's just a little disappointing considering how distinctive the fighters look. There are these little comic sheets that display between matches during arcade mode that gives a very loose idea of who these guys are. But outside of this, and I'm sure the game manual itself, there isn't much to work with.
The graphics in Slap Happy Rhythm Busters look like they lost their way trying to get to the Dreamcast.
Well, yeah, it wouldn't be too far off to say that Polygon Magic was heavily inspired by the very same colorful street culture aesthetic popularized by Sega around that time through games like Jet Set Radio.
Obviously, we don't really know a whole lot about early 2000s Japanese youth culture, but they carried over that shell-shaded graffiti style visuals pretty faithfully, and these characters definitely pop out against the very and distinctive 2D backgrounds. This game will fit in pretty nicely with the kind of games that were usually found on the Dreamcast, so it's pretty damn impressive what the devs managed to pull off on the PlayStation when taking into account that it's several times weaker than Sega's final console.
Unlike the graphics, I don't feel the music of the game helps the presentation all that much.
What? Why? It carries over that Jet Set Radio inspiration in this department too, and you love those soundtracks.
No, don't get me wrong. The music of Rhythm Busters is indeed good. I don't have an issue with the tracks themselves. The problem is that while the music would fit perfectly in a racing or a similar jet grind style title, I don't think it works all that well for a fighting game. Because of the genre of music chosen, there are long stretches of repetitive beats with some of the tracks. And since this is a fighting game where you have to focus on what's actually happening in the match, the music tends to drift into the background. The various beats end up feeling more like something you'd hear from a neighbor upstairs than a soundtrack driving or accompanying the action. It's not every song in the game, but a lot of them suffer from this in my opinion.
I got you, and I guess I can see that point. My question is, would the game work with a more Jet Set style Hideki Naganuma track? Those tend to be more structured. Would that fit more for a fighting game?
Close. Although even that style of music might not be a perfect fit, but you're on the right track. I think Sonic Rush style music here will feel right at home. Those are fast-paced tracks that don't drag on and gets to the point much faster. And since they're designed to compete for attention while you're playing a Sonic game, which demands a lot more focus than a typical platformer, I think that kind of energy would work great for a fighting game.
Look, we learned from our Blazing Strike video. We're not going to talk about the entire roster for this game. Instead, we'll focus on a few of our favorites. Luckily, as we said earlier, the characters in this game aren't complicated, so we'll be rapid firing through them.
Slap Happy Rhythm Busters has a total of 21 characters. That's a very respectable number for a new fighting game, even if 5 or 6 characters falls in the clone or poorly thought out gimmick camps.
Anybody remember that Oreg is a reference to Oleg from Polygon Magic's earlier game Versus? Well, he isn't the only one, although he's the most faithful. Let's go over the Versus trio. We might as well start off with Oreg. Though there isn't much to say, he's pretty much a standard grappler with nothing really stand out other than what feels like a zero-frame startup super command grab. And sounded like a Pokemon during his victory pose.
The only thing that connects Ramos to his Versus counterpart is his name, of course, and headset. Although the headset works more here outside of trying to justify a random design by just calling him a rapper. Slap Happy's take on the character sees him as a DJ who's the game's stand-in pro-tag Shoto archetype. Once again, there isn't much to talk about because he's just a Shoto. Flaming Disc Fireball, a standard Dragon Punch, you know the drill. Of course, being the protagonist who has the Fireball DP combo, he comes packing with a dark variant with Dark Ramos, which is just him in a bull skull mask slapped on happily. He's a pretty solid design for an evil version though. Beats me what makes him different outside of said design though.
The last fighter who's carrying the soul of a Versus character is the game's Chun-Li analog, Mia, who shares her namesake, general hairstyle, and allergy to any kind of shirt that doesn't expose at least 85% of her body. I still don't know what Versus Mia is supposed to be wearing. Outside of slinging fireballs, Mia is pretty much good at everything, sporting some of the strongest set of normals in the game. She more or less has an answer for everything. Considering the strange way most characters are designed in this game, everyone should have a pocket Mia. She's that good. And it's kind of justified because she was absolute shit in Versus.
Vivian and Roxy, their parents seem to have 2 completely different ideas on how to approach naming their kids, are a pair of twins whose gimmick is that they switch positions during different attacks. Now I know what you're thinking, and no, these 2 should be dope rushed down mix-up characters, but the switch is only visual and doesn't have any real gameplay functionality. Much like a lot of the roster, maybe that was the idea, but it fell through for one reason or another. Switching aside, they're still a fairly solid character overall, and I suppose you can always swap them around after knocking the opponent down to try to make things confusing for them, but at that point you'll just be doing it for yourself. I'm just going to assume her name reads as Yuri, and she's another half-baked idea of a character. She seems to be going for this highly mobile all-rounder type, seeing that she's the only character in the game that comes with any kind of air movement in the form of air dashes, of which she has 2. And while this does provide her with the best movement overall in the game, it doesn't help her out much. First off, her main zoning tool, this flamethrower, has a bad hitbox and will constantly whiff on grounded opponents, making it suited more for air-to-air. She also has this diving attack that has a crap ton of startup and doesn't lead to much. Also, once on the ground, she has a command grab for some reason. What really holds this character back is something we mentioned earlier, the stubby nature of normals, which just makes it difficult to even land an attack from the air. If someone more experienced with the game can correct me, that'd be great, but she just feels terrible.
Speaking of feeling terrible, Frosty feels like absolute ass to play. Despite having a knife, he barely moves his arms, and forget about any kicking either. The only thing this guy has going for him is an admittedly pretty fucking broken Infinite, and that's about it. Garya feels like a very Capcom coded character. She's a space controller zoner that fights primarily with sort of heavy normals to keep opponents at bay. She can also throw out walls with pretty active hitboxes. She's fun.
April's another zoner, but I'm just gonna throw up some quotation marks around that word. She has some pretty cheap feeling knives to throw around, but outside of that, she doesn't offer very much. April blows chunks, which is really disappointing because she looks really cool.
So, is Slap Happy Rhythm Buster some hidden forgotten gem that everyone should rush out and experience? No, not really. While the game is perfectly playable, and even brings a couple of interesting ideas to the table, such as beat rush and the stun mechanic, it's ultimately far too bare bones from a gameplay perspective to stay engaging for long.
It was also just a little too awkward for us to enjoy. The almost universal poor reach on normal attacks, the undercooked character archetypes, and the limited attacking options along with strange design choices like not letting most heavy normals be cancelable really holds back what could have been an interesting game.
None of these issues make the game bad by any stretch of the imagination, but Slap Happy Rhythm Buster still feels overly simplistic for his own good. And that's especially disappointing because with a few small tweaks, it easily could have been elevated into something great. This brings us back to the question we asked at the beginning of the video. Is Slap Happy Rhythm Busters any good? Yeah, but it's right on the borderline. It's designed well enough to avoid being outright below average, yet the simplicity and the odd gameplay quirks keep it from holding attention for very long. Still, it's nice to see Polygon Magic redeem itself after how disappointing Versus turned out to be.
With that being said, we here at TCB would like to introduce you guys to a new concept for the runback, a living tier list. From here on out, we'll be ranking every game we cover, and Slap Happy Rhythm Busters feel like it fits nicely in the C tier. And since we talked about it an episode ago, let's go ahead and rank Blazing Strike as well, which lands somewhere in D. Don't worry about where the previous episode's games will go, we'll reveal those soon enough. With all that out of the way, that concludes this rhythmic episode of the Runback. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.
Team call, buddy. All right.